Badger fans, let's talk defense. I'm going to tell you why Mr. Leteju is one of my favorite guys in this class, while Justin's going to rave about Jaylen Williams. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Badger fans? Welcome to NSD Defensive Edition. This is Locked On Badgers. I'm Ryan. That dude over there is Justin, the recruiting guru, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. New bets get $5 with you'll win. If you win your first $5 bet, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, or at FanDuel.com to get started. Justin, one of your favorite times of the year. Let's talk defense. We're going to get into every position, talk every player, put the film up, grade the spots. But who are your top three defensive prospects in this class? Just your top three favorites.
Sure. Jaylen Williams. I've been touting him since the second we offered him. Number two would probably be Nicolas Clayton. I absolutely love his film. I feel like he's exactly what we've been missing kind of as an edge guy. He has a little bit of that burst that we used to have with the Zach Bond types, the, Nick Herbig types. He's more that type of athlete off the edge. And then it's Mason Posa. Like, you have that guy in the middle who can just be a game wrecker. And that's absolutely what I think he's capable of being. I think he's a guy that comes in, and I think that he has an opportunity to get reps year one. I
love that list.
Yeah,
I love that list. I'm going to substitute Leteju in for Posa, but it's not a Posa knock. It's just more of, I think Leteju's
did well in this class.
Yeah, I think Leteju's upside is enormous. And then everything you said with Clayton, I agree with. And then Jaylen Williams, my goodness. Like, you get a guy with that athleticism, that wingspan at that spot that you desperately needed, blue chip player. Let's start there. Let's start with Jaylen Williams and put the film up. I know you already kind of touched on him, but let's dive a little deeper into how big of a win that is for the Badgers.
Yeah, absolutely. Wisconsin just doesn't get 6'6", 260-pound guys coming in that have really good burst and really good lateral quickness and also body control at that size. He's a guy who moves really, really well and has some versatility. Like, if you had to ask him to jump inside for a play against an opponent, he's capable of doing that because he's actually a guy who has that type of athleticism and ability to get low that I think, now obviously he gets a little high on some of his film here, but you could see that he's capable of getting low. And that's something that they will get him to do consistently once he gets into a college program. He has an opportunity to be a dominant player on the edge for them. And that's something Wisconsin hasn't had an athlete like this on the defensive line. I love Keanu Benton. Williams is capable of being even more of an athlete than that because he's got more pass rush upside too.
The thing I love with Williams, and you hit on it a little bit, is just the versatility. This is not a player that's a one-trick pony. He's an all-trick pony. You can move on the inside on pass rushing situations, on the outside to set the edge. I love some of the football awareness, too. You see it in some of the read option stuff. He breaks down, and then he'll run to the ball. He understands what he's supposed to do. Huge frame that's going to fill out. He's going to be a monster. He's going to be 6'6", 300 pounds. He's a four-star composite player, elite, monstrous offer list, decommitted from Michigan. And I think you can move him all along that defensive line, Justin. I think you can play him anywhere, matchup dependent, situation dependent. This is absolutely the type of talent you need to find on this spot to upgrade this roster. Enormous get for the Badgers.
Absolutely. It sounds like he wants to be a little bit more of a stand-up guy, but I think he's a guy that you can move around. Like, when you get into straight up pass rush packages, you basically could say, all right, we're going to do some things with you, because this is the type of guy that you can move along the defensive line and just mess with the game plan that an offense has. Maybe they want to double him if he's on the edge. Oh, now suddenly you bump him inside, and it's like it throws off blocking schemes because you're trying to account for a guy that you're not expecting. Or maybe you go heavy on a side and drop Clayton in there with him. Well, now you've got two guys that have really good quickness, and one that's got ability to just bulldoze you, and another guy who's like a race car coming off the edge.
Well, he's also just got those enormous arms, man. Like, all the tip passes, the quick deflections, and it also allows them to play half up on an offensive lineman to kind of hold somebody off and still set the edge. It's also really unique change of direction skills for a guy his size. You'll see him get caught kind of looking the wrong way, but he's athletic enough to run back down the line of scrimmage into the play for that size. Just really unique. Justin and I are obviously both incredibly high on Jaylen Williams. Let's move into Xavier Ukponu. We'll stay on the defensive line. Thoughts on Xavier Ukponu, one of the most underrated guys in this class, in my opinion.
You know those things that they put out in front of cars in the parking lot to keep them from running
Yeah.
into the store? He's effectively one of those, like that steel post that's there that you run into it, you destroy your car. That's Xavier Ukponu. He's just, you watch him, and it was kind of startling to me to watch him on film, because what he would do is he would get hit by people and you'd see him engage the offensive lineman, but it's almost like he's toying with them because he's looking around to see where the ball is. And then when he sees where it is and starts to move towards it, he just chucks aside the offensive lineman and just makes the play. Like, he's not a guy who's going to be super disruptive, but you're not going to move him. Like, he's just super strong for his size. He's a guy who has very natural strength. It's not a weight room thing for me. Like, you see it right there. He just discarded the offensive lineman. He's getting double teamed. He's like, all right, get out of the way.
He toys with them a little bit. And this is something you need in your trenches. You need a guy who's squat, strong, powerful, can suck up an offensive lineman, not get pushed back, and that allows the linebackers to flow and make plays. One of the unique things with Ukponu is he's young to football, which is impressive when you see his ability to read running gaps. Like, he will read the play and, to your point, chuck the offensive lineman and be in the right gap. But he hasn't played a lot of football. I think it's really impressive. He came over from, I think it was Nigeria. He's really only been playing football since a freshman.
He has really good reactions. For a guy who doesn't show a lot of upfield burst, he's really quick with his ability to diagnose and move.
I've said this is a guy, it's really hard to expect too much out of freshman defensive linemen, but this would be the one guy I'd look at and say, I could see him getting a couple reps because functionally he's just kind of a brute.
Yep.
And this team needs that.
Yeah, they absolutely. I mean, he's a guy who I think can comfortably carry 315 as a freshman. We'll see what the strength, how that plays out. But he just feels like a guy that's also not going to get bullied a lot by somebody who's a little bit older than him in the college game. I just think there's that level of natural strength with him that he'll at least be solid. Like, he may not be dominant as a true freshman, but I think he'll be able to hold up and not get just buried at times.
Yeah, I do. The last thing I'd say on Ukponu is this is part of that rebuilding of the defensive line. Yep. You have to get numbers every year. And I think he's probably more of a two-down guy. I don't think this is a player you're going to have.
He's not a guy you're going to have out there third and long.
3rd and 12. But this is a guy that can get you to 3rd and 9. This is a guy that can get you to 3rd and 12 because they're not going to be able to run on you with guys like this in the middle of the field. So that's the importance of Xavier Ukponu. And that's why he's not a 4-star guy, is because he's not super disruptive.
He's not as well-rounded. Yep.
But he can get you to those passing situations. Let's talk about the other interior guy, Jaylen Williams. I know that's a guy you're pretty high on as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the lightning to the thunder that's Xavier Ukponu. Pavey moves. He's got some elite movement ability for a guy who's an interior guy. In my opinion, he's got a great first step. He's a guy who really understands pass rush from the interior. Think of him as a slightly bigger version of Elijah Hills from this year's team. He's a guy who's going to be able to comfortably carry 300 plus and actually be able to really show burst yet on the interior. And that's not something that Wisconsin has a lot of in head. There's a little bit of Keanu Benton there. I don't think he's got the physicality of a guy like Benton, but there's some similarities there in terms of a movement ability with him.
Yeah, he's definitely pretty explosive and quick. And this is a guy we talked about previously with some of the offensive players, Cam Clark in particular. This film got better, which you always love to see going from junior to senior year, players taking that step, continuing to develop. He looked a lot more explosive and powerful to me as a senior compared to his junior film. And I think you want players who are on that upward trajectory. I like the explosiveness. To your point, this is a guy, interior pass rushing is one of the most difficult things you can find. That's why Elijah Hills was a revelation this year. This is a player that gives you some of that. His hands are really good for a younger defensive lineman. Like, he really understands how to pass rush from the interior and how to kind of get skinny through that guard center gap. That's a unique skill set to get. Yep.
I mean, you look at his senior numbers, he's a guy who, from a tackle for loss and sack standpoint, effectively had defensive end numbers. That doesn't happen very often on the interior because those guys normally get a lot of double teams in the high school game. He clearly did not struggle with that his senior year.
Let's talk about the other defensive lineman in this class, Justin, the in-state kid, Torin Petaway, about 6'5", 260, big frame. What are your thoughts on Petaway? Who we've talked about it for a long time because he's committed, not committed, then recommitted.
Yeah, he's a little bit rawer than the other guys in the class. I look at him as somebody who's going to be a little bit more of a project. You got to love the frame. He's a guy who's big and physical, but he's going to have to probably get a little bit more polish in terms of pad level and just understanding it burst and his leverage. He's not great with that quite yet, but there's a lot of pieces to like there where you might be able to get a really good rotational piece out of this. A guy who can show you some ability to be able to come in and provide that second wave.
Yep. I think that's dead on. I think that's dead on. I think this is a player you get because of the frame, the projectability, the size. I think maybe he develops into a strong side kind of defensive end and edge setter. I don't know if he's ever going to have the burst to be a great pass rusher. I don't know if that's going to be in his bag or not. But he kind of reminds me a little bit of the guy we lost, Wilnerson Telemock, a player who has a big frame, who you think can develop into something.
Yeah, I would say he's a little wider than him.
Yeah.
Like he's a guy who's going to comfortably carry weight a little bit more, where with Wilnerson, I expected him to be a guy who played the edge, but maybe a little lighter. I think that Petaway can easily, you could get him to 300, and I don't think it would be a problem.
I think you want him there.
Yeah. I think at minimum you want him at 290 because I just think that that's where he kind of projects. Grade
this group. So this 4 defensive lineman group.
It's an A for me. I really, the top two, the way I look at it, Jaylen Williams was my favorite defensive lineman in the entire class. When I looked at offers, I'm like, they have to get this guy. I was absolutely crushed when he went to Michigan.
I remember.
And when he came back. So he was absolutely my favorite get in the entire class. Pavey, I really liked. And then I saw his senior film and I'm like, okay, now he has moved himself up a rung. And I look at him as another guy that was a top get. And Ukponu just projects so well as a guy who can help in the run defense. And then you have a guy who's kind of a lottery ticket in Petaway, where you look at it and maybe he turns into something that we're not expecting.
So I'm going to be a little bit lower, although I love this class. I think it's like a B plus-ish. Just because I think to get an A for me, like Jaylen Williams, you get one of those guys every year, you're in the consideration for an A. But I think a more all-around interior guy that you would say this is a 3-down disruptive guy, that would be an A to me. This is still really good though. This is a B+ class. I like all these pieces. I think Petaway has a pretty high ceiling actually if he can hit it. Jaylen Williams we hit on. I love the 2 interior guys. If one of those guys was a little higher pedigree, I think it's an A. But to me, it's like a B+ class, which is still really good. And what I think if you got this every year, Justin, you'd be just fine.
Oh, absolutely. I think it would be 2 back-to-back classes of this would probably be the best defensive line room Wisconsin's had since Barry was here.
Yeah, most talented for sure. Most young talented. Coming up, more recruiting talk, but first, a quick second for our friends of the show over at Better Together. Better Together is the first cooperative daily fantasy application. Better Together offers a familiar experience for existing DFS players. If you played it before, it's not going to be a surprise, but with a social twist. Now you get to do it with a teammate, a friend, a buddy, a family member, whatever it is. Put your group to the test, build that camaraderie, build community through sports. Better Together is the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent, and you get to play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the DFS social movement over at Better Together. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign up using code Locked On, promo code Locked On, for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code Locked On, because winning alone is fun, but it is better together. All right, let's jump back into recruiting talk. Let's shift into the linebackers. Let's start with your boy, Nicolas Clayton. Actually, one of all of our favorites guys in this class. Thoughts on Nicolas Clayton, the commit from Florida?
He's interesting because I brought up Zach Bond. I brought up Nick Herbig. He's that, but he's got the prototypical frame to be an NFL 6'4" edge rusher guy who could probably conceivably carry 250 if you wanted to put it on him and still have great burst off the edge. I think he'll probably play college at 240 plus, but he's got that length and frame and ability to really come off the edge. That's going to be something that Wisconsin, we haven't had this type of frame other than Van Ginkel at that spot. And I guess you could put TJ Watt in it. I think that when I look at it, I think Clayton's a little more twitchy than maybe Watt is, but Watt is probably a lot more physical. His feet are just so, like, he's got so much quickness.
Yeah, Watt is definitely a more physical, but I love the Bond type of comp, the AVG type of comp. Yeah. He just screams off the edge. Nicolas Clayton is the dude. This is the type of guy who, if you don't if you don't watch a lot of football, you just go and you're like, that guy looks like a football player.
Mhm.
He's built like one, long frame. He comes off the edge like a sprinter, but he's also got a lot of some nuance in his pass rush. Like he'll dip the shoulder, he'll use his hands, he'll rip, he'll set some stuff up. He's not just a raw
counter.
athlete.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not a raw athlete.
If you take a false step against him, you're dead, because his goal is he doesn't even want you to get your hands on.
Yep.
He's quick enough to get away with it.
This is the type of athlete we've talked all year, and we've gone back and forth, scheme, talent, blah, blah. This is the type of guy who just create disruption, though.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to scheme up disruption when you're this athletic, because this guy can just beat somebody one-on-one.
I'm going to be blunt. I expect him to play this next year. I think in obvious pass rush sets, he is going to be the best athlete off the edge that we probably have on the roster. There are a couple guys that are probably consideration. We'll see where Herbig's at coming in. I expect him to actually be playing. But I expect Clayton to be a guy in packages just because he is so fast off the edge that he's going to be a problem for quarterbacks. We haven't had a guy that has come in this pass rush ready since Herbig.
Yeah. This is the type of player Wisconsin needs to get every cycle. They need to get a player who can cause disruption, who can be difficult, who can be an athlete. This is you see some of the backside pursuit from Nicolas Clayton as well. This is the type of guy where you're playing a mobile quarterback. He can track him down backside.
And he's playing in Florida, so he's playing at other athletes, and he's a guy that really stands out still.
Dude, you know what he reminds me of? You see those Nat Geo shows where like the gazelle's running and then the cougar, not the cougar, that wouldn't be the right ecosystem, but like the cheetah tracks him down. Yeah. He looks like a predator out there just tracking down ball carriers. I love Nicolas Clayton, man. One of my favorite guys in this class.
He took a false step on that one and still ended up coming out of the break.
This is a big time get for the staff. Big time get. Let's go to Mason Posa, the 4-star linebacker, Albuquerque, New Mexico, multiple-time state championship wrestler. Thoughts on Mason Posa, man? Another guy that we're very high on.
In all honesty, he's probably the best inside linebacker target we've had since Leo Chanel, who was criminally underrated. Posa is just a game wrecker. He's a guy who is so athletic and so fast and plays really physically. I think the big thing with him is going to be reining him in and making him play within the scheme a little bit, because he does a lot of freelancing in high school, and they're going to need him to be assignment sound. But the athletic tools are there for him to absolutely just annihilate stuff.
He almost looks like he's sped up on the film. Now he's not playing. He's not playing the best level of comp here.
No, he's the best athlete on the field in every game he plays.
Yeah, and it looks it. One of the things I love about him is versatility. You talk about Posa, man. There's plays where he'll be almost a deep safety. There's plays where he's coming off the edge. There's plays where he's in the middle. He's playing special teams. You know what he does? He plays football like a wrestler. Like he's intense. He tracks people down. He buries people. And wrestlers have like a certain level of competitiveness to them, a certain level of tenacity, a certain level of toughness. This is a big time get for the Badgers. Beat out Oregon for him, 4-star player, one of the highest rated recruits in the class. And he's a guy who you talk to him, he's all in. Like he is all in. Like, let's go to Madison, let's win titles. This one of the biggest things we've been missing this year, Justin, and this is an intangible thing. And you and I have both talked to Mason Posa, so I think we have a better feel here than if you just watch film. This team desperately needed some leaders on defense, some guys who just give up crap. That's Mason Posa.
Well, you had Leo Chanel as one of the guys I brought up. Posa's got a little bit of that meathead in him. Like, screw it, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
And you need some of those guys that are willing to bark, because he feels like a guy that's going to get on his teammates. And I think you need to have 3 or 4 of those guys in your defense that are going to be like, you're not playing up to the level that I expect from you. Get it together. And the more of those guys you have, the better the standards are on your defense. But this is the type of guy that I look at that I feel like has that type of game to him. And I think that absolutely projects well for Wisconsin, getting a guy like that is going to be tough and expect a lot from everybody else.
This linebacker class is good, man. Let's get to the other guy. Let's get to Samuel Leteju. Thoughts on Samuel Leteju coming out of New Jersey?
Yeah, we talked about Jaylen Williams standing up a little off the edge. There's some similarities there that I look at with Leteju. Like, I think that those two guys are going to be used in some similar ways. We're probably going to see Leteju be more of a stand-up end. He's a guy who's big, fast, and he's very, like, he's learning. Like, he's a baby deer. We've talked about this with certain other guys. He's one of those guys that's really going to pick it up once he gets college level consistently. But there's tools there that you look, and it's similar with Jaylen Williams. where you have a really big, long athlete who's strong and physical and moves better than any offensive lineman can. And they also have that kind of ability to get low and get into a guy that makes them a problem. You're doing a good job of kind of getting this room of guys that are going to be capable of causing, disruption off the edge because they have the body and frame that we just don't have on the roster right now. And you picked up one on Ernest Willer this last class, but even he's smaller than both Williams and Leteju, who are guys that really have that ability to, if they get on a tackle, they have the arm length to be able to kind of hold them off from being able to get into them and really block them, and the quickness to make that tackle uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love the upside here with Leteju. Love the upside. This is another player. We talked about Xavier Ukponu coming from overseas. Leteju is one of those guys. He hasn't played a lot of football in his life. Grew up playing soccer. Grew up playing basketball. Right. Grew up doing other things, which is great for footwork, athleticism. Justin hit it right. He's a baby deer with a ton of upside, athletic ability. He's going to end up being like 260 with a wingspan running like a 4.65, like a 4.7. Sorry, not a 4.65.
Yeah. He's a guy who legitimately has the frame to carry 270 if he had to. So you can naturally let him bulk up to what he's comfortable with and feel like he's not going to probably lose a ton.
This is also a player like lived at his coach's house for a while. Coach Sykes just raves about him. The type of kid that you want all your players to be. Another culture guy, I think like Posa, this is going to be a guy who's going to come into the locker room, the culture, and really help build it. This is one of those culture building pieces, in my opinion, having talked to him, having talked to his coach, having talked to people on the staff. I am so high on Leteju. I think people can see it. What would you grade this linebacker room?
I think it's an A. And I feel like we're saying this a lot, but these are top level like every one of these guys, Clayton and Posa and Leteju were all plan A's.
Yeah.
And they all fit different specific abilities that you'd like to have. Like it's a very versatile room where you're getting guys that are stocking a room that they're things that you lacked on this year's roster. So I look at it and it's like, these are guys you can see where they fit and how they can help your team.
I realize I completely forgot about Cooper Catalano too. In-state inside linebacker.
Typical interior linebacker guy.
Yep. Plays incredibly productive.
Yep. Smart, really productive player in the middle. I would say he reminds me a little bit of Sanborn. Like that, He's that type of inside linebacker where he's a guy who maybe he's going to get lost in some of the physical tools of the other guys, but he plays really hard and he's not a slouch as an athlete at all. And he's very physical.
This is the type of player you look at 3 years later and you see the stats there, 11 games, 178 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. This is the type of player that you look back 3 years later and you say, yeah, he really became a productive player for this defense. Mm-hmm. He reminds me a little bit of, you remember Mike Taylor? Actually, that kind of linebacker that just tackled.
I think he's a little bit better athlete than Taylor was, but yeah.
He reminds me of that type of guy, though, like that type of vein, who's just going to an Iowa type linebacker, right? That's
just super productive, gets a ton of tackles every game, always is in the right spot.
I believe he set the Wisconsin all-time record for tackles as a linebacker at his level. Like the level of productivity there is absolutely incredible. This linebacker room, I agree with you. To me, it's an A as well. I think you get high upside kids, you get culture kids, you get disruptive players off the edge. I think Clayton and Posa, Leteju all have immense upside. I think a guy like Cooper Catalano has a tremendous floor, which is not a knock. Like I think he's an incredibly safe prospect that you're going to bring in. Is also going to help build the culture. I think this. What's a better recruiting haul to you, linebacker or offensive line?
Oh man, in terms of need, it's definitely a linebacker. In terms of overall, what I think their ceiling is in terms of pro potential, maybe slightly to offensive line. I think in both rooms you could have literally every one of these guys go to the NFL.
It's close though, right?
I look at it and listen, when I say that, because I've had people push back and be like, "Oh, you're kind of, sunshine pumping a little bit." That I'm talking ceilings on these guys. This is if everything goes right. The tools that are there are NFL level tools. It's up to these guys to do all the development and be able to become the player that they're capable of becoming, but they're not going to be held back by physical tools.
Yeah, I agree. Who is the best college career? Throw out pro upside here. Who do you think has the best college career among this group?
I think it's going to be Clayton because
I
I think
think
there's going to be a shock plays. But I
Okay.
think Posa would probably be a close second.
All right, back with recruiting in 1 second. But first, a quick word from our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel, you know them. I know them. They're incredible. They're awesome. Right now, new customers, $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets if you win. You're not going to want to turn that away. What could you do with $150 in bonus bets? Well, you could put some futures on Wisconsin Badgers college basketball. With the way Greg Gard has built this wagon, why not? Do it responsibly, but FanDuel is the number one source for all of your parlays, teasers, spreads, futures, especially with the NFL coming up on the playoffs. NBA's full swing, college basketball's going on. It is a great time to get started over at FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, the official sportsbook of the National Football League. They are fast, easy, simple. And again, you get a great starter offer. That $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets. Terms to apply. Again, create an account. Create the account. Use over at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. The best place to get all your sports spiced up a little bit more over at FanDuel.com. All right, let's jump back into recruiting talk. It's NSD. Let's go. All right, let's move to the secondary. A bunch of intriguing names here. Let's start with the newest guy, Kairos Gaines, who I don't have the film because he just committed, but we talked about him a little bit. Just committed, about 6'1", 180. He's listed at 160. He's not 160. He's bigger than that. We'll call him 175. Physical player. He reminds me a little bit of Nizier Fort Green. What are your thoughts on Kairos Gaines?
I heard that comp. Somebody told me that from the show you did the other day, and I agree with it. I watch him. He looks a little bit more like a zone corner to me. Guy who is really good at keeping his eyes up front and driving on the ball, whether it's his guy or just breaking on a play because he can just see it in the quarterback's eyes where he's going. The couple picks that he made on that, he's a little bit of a ball hawk. I think he's a very physical guy. He likes to hit. And even as a guy who didn't have a ton of weight on him, was absolutely blowing people up on his film. That translates. Like, those are things that get you on the field and they make plays. Where he's potentially going to be struggle is when you get him against somebody who's got elite quickness on the outside. Yep. Somebody who's fast, he's going to have trouble staying in front of.
I agree. Let's shift to Jamar Washington, 3-star kid, 86 overall. We both like Jamar Washington. What are your thoughts there as we pull up that film?
Athletically, I mean, we could say the only real true hit on him is true top end speed. And when I say that, he's not a slouch as an athlete at all. He's extremely athletic as a corner. I just think that he's probably more of a 4-5 guy than being a 4-4 guy. And because of that, you look at it and you're kind of like, this is a guy who is super athletic, and the things that he does well translate. He moves really well laterally. He's a guy who's super physical. He's a guy who can jump out of the gym. Like, he's absolutely the type of athlete you want to put out there, because there's not going to be a receiver that's going to be able to out-athlete him.
Yep. Good ball skills. Like, you see that in the clips everywhere. I love how physical he is. Like, you need guys who can tackle in space, who can come up and pop people. Mm-hmm. His film is literally a highlight reel of that, of tackling in space, of not letting those playmakers get outside of him. Really physical, good size. Again, that fits his mold of this coaching staff, right? What do they look for in DBs? Mm-hmm. Frames, athletic, tough. All these guys kind of fit that mold. This is a really good get for me. Coming from a pretty good area of football as well, a good level of competition. Feels like the type of guy who you can plug and play pretty early, like redshirt freshman-ish probably. Like, doesn't need a lot of physical development. Yeah. He already plays pretty tough. He already plays pretty physical. I like this kid a lot for the Badgers.
You'd like to see him get a little lower in his back pedal, but yeah, there's not a lot of stuff that you look at with him that you're going to be nitpicking when you look at his film.
Let's jump into the next one. Let's jump into Jameer Scott. 4-star kid, 89 overall. I get those two mixed up because their first names are so similar.
This is a kid that's had an absolutely monster senior year. Absolutely dominated as a receiver and as a corner/safety. He's a get. This is a 4-star kid on the back end that can play some nickel. He's a little Austin Brownish if you're looking at him from a skill set. He's a guy who can come down and cover in the nickel, but he's a guy who can also drop back and play center field. Tons of tackles, tons of turnovers. He's a problem in coverage. Like, he's absolutely a high level coverage guy that can probably go out there and play with a tight end. I really like his skill set. I think he projects really well at this level. I think he's exactly the type of player that they want on the inside. And that's huge for them to get another guy because that room's kind of getting cleared out a little bit moving
Yeah,
forward.
it is. Yeah, this in some ways similar to Washington. To me, I think this is a guy that can play pretty early. Like just so physically built already. He plays downhill already. I'm curious where I think he's going to play eventually. I think is it slot corner? Do you think he's not?
I think he's going to be kind of a hybrid like Austin Brown.
Yeah,
he'll play them both, but I think he's a guy who I think can stick a little bit more in center field. Like the coverage ability is real with him. He's absolutely a guy that can sit back there and play center field if you want him to.
I don't think he's a guy you can put on the boundary and say go run with elite receivers.
Yeah, I think with that it's going to be a technique thing for him. It's going to come down to is he capable of coming up and really pressing a guy. I wouldn't say he's got top end speed, but I think there's versatility there. In he's not going to struggle with most.
Yeah,
most guys he's going to be able to hold up with fine. It's when you get those top tier guys, the Ohio States out there, where he may be a guy that can be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, one thing I do like about him is I think when you watch the film, you see him in a variety of spots. It goes back to the versatility. You mentioned Austin Brown. I think you could be able to, maybe he's a guy who can play a little press coverage on the slot, right? Then he can play a little deep zone. Then he can come up and play in run defense. You can move him into a lot of places. And, as a chess piece for a defensive coordinator, this is a guy that can cover up a lot of holes on a defense, I think. I think it's a really good get for the Badgers. I agree with you there. What would you grade the cornerback group here? Assuming these are all kind of cornerback. Some of these DBs that we're going to talk about are a little interchangeable, but we're going to call this the cornerback room. What would you grade it? I
would probably give it a B+. Last year was an A. Xavier Lucas is a unicorn.
Yeah.
I don't think you have anyone that's quite to that level. I think I really like the upside of Scott in Washington. I think that you have a guy in Skanes who's capable of being a really good depth piece, along with a guy who's going to be a capable rotational player. He just doesn't necessarily have the top end. So yeah, to me, it's a really good group that's coming in. It's just not necessarily anyone that you look at and be like, okay, this guy's going to be an all-conference type player.
Yeah, I think it's a B, maybe B-. You know what you're missing in this class is you're missing that long, fast corner that Rakeem Stroud would have been, that Gentry would have been. That's really
totally fair.
Yeah, that's really the one thing you're missing, right? And they wanted it. They went after it. They had a couple in house, and they just weren't even playing onto them. Skanes isn't that guy to fill that exact need. So I think if they got that, it would be like an A-, B+. Because I do like the really physical DBs that are going to tackle in space, which is Washington, which is Scott. But they're missing a burner on the edge in this class. Let's move to safeties. Let's start with Luke Emmerich, the kid out of Minnesota, had an injury, came back, good athlete. What are your thoughts on Luke Emmerich?
Is it Emmerich or Emmerich?
Emmerich. Sorry, I think it is Emmerich. Yeah.
I think that he's showing some development. Like, I know he was injured last year. He's a guy that I think his best days are ahead of him yet as a player. There's a lot of interesting physical tools there. Like, he's a guy who can really run. He's a very willing hitter. Wisconsin has needed some depth in the safety room, and they're getting a couple of dudes in this class that are absolutely willing to come up and just crush people. He's a big hitter.
Yeah, he is.
His instincts look much improved from his junior year. I thought one of the things that when I watched him is that he didn't look overly like fluid out there in terms of knowing what his responsibilities were. He looks significantly improved this year.
I love this kid. This is one of my favorites. Some of it's I was able to talk to him, so I'm a little more biased. He'll play a bunch of different spots. He's just a football player. To your point, he will come up and just lay the wood on, to the point where he's going to have to be careful with some of the type of hits he has, right? Because I laugh, but like, you're going to get 15 yards on a couple of the hits he has. But you would rather have a player that comes in, that plays downhill, that plays with that type of aggression, than have to coach that into him, right?
Yeah.
Let's rein it back a little bit instead of teaching you how to come up and hit. This is a player who's just going to come up and force the run, but he's fast enough. I think he's fast enough. He can play some deep center too. I think you can get
absolutely. I think both him and Dean both can.
Yep, we're going to get Dean in a second. I like Emmerich a lot. I like Emmerich. I mean, I haven't asked you this, but who's a guy on defense who you think will outplay his ranking to some degree?
It might very well be Emmerich.
Emmerich is my guy for that.
He's the guy I could see end up being a borderline all-conference type safety. Both guys, honestly. I think that they're going to require a little bit of development because from a body standpoint, I think they're They're guys who probably need to pack on a little bit of weight. But I think that the instincts are there for them to both be really good players.
Well, let's get into the other one that you're mentioning then. Grant Dean, that's the Wisconsin kid coming in. Grant Dean is a high to kind of a highish 3-star composite. I think he's an 87.
Yeah, he's a 4-star in at least one service.
Yep, he got a bump recently, had a good senior season. Let me put that film up. What are your thoughts on Grant Dean?
Can really run. I believe he's a 10-8 guy, which puts him comfortably under, that high 4-4, 4-5 area. That's what you're looking for at safety. A good body. I believe he's like 6'2". So he's a bigger kid, a little bit thinner frame. So he's not a guy who's super wide body, but he can absolutely come up and lay the lumber, just like he kind of reminds you a little bit of Wooler. Like, I think he might have an extra gear that Wooler doesn't have. And Wooler was probably a little bit more instinctual in terms of coming up and playing the run. But similar athletes, guys who can really move on the field and guys who are playmakers.
Yeah, getting those two feels like a really high floor. Like, I'd be surprised if neither of these guys pans out. And I think both could play on special teams, both give you versatility. Both will come up and tackle. Both, again, feel like pretty good culture guys. It feels like they got a lot of good culture guys on defense.
Yeah, and both feel like guys who could end up being leadership type guys.
I agree. I like to listen on both these safeties as well. We talked about it a lot. In fact, if you talk about all these DBs, man, what's the one constant? It's tackling.
Yeah.
It's tackling people in space. All the corners, all the safeties. I mean, every one of them, man, they tackle in space. And with the way offenses spread you out now, that's so important. Also, you see special teams ability here. Let's get into the last safety, Remington Moss, a guy that I've been committed for a long time. I love Remington Moss as well. That's another guy I like. What are your thoughts on Remington Moss?
Yeah, when we talk about big and physicality, that's Remington Moss. Like, he's the guy out of there that when you talk NFL pedigree, Remington Moss is the guy that has that type of frame. 6'2". I think he'll be a guy that by the time everything gets all said and done, probably comfortably carries 200. I think he runs well enough. I think he's a guy who's super physical. In fact, we talked about it when we were looking at him as some of his corner film, and I was like, he's a guy that he gets away with a lot of stuff that probably won't fly as much when he gets up there, but he's super physical with receivers. And like, you watch him, it projects well. He's a guy who I could think they might try at corner even a little bit.
Well, and that's what I was going to say first is this is not a lock to be a safety in Remington Moss. Remington Moss could, he's a physical guy. If you were listening to the podcast, that woof was just Remington Moss decleating somebody. He's a physical player who could be a kind of press, bump and run type of cover corner if you wanted that. He's not a
Lucas without the top speed. Like, he's that type of player.
Really good ball skills as well. This is a player who's going to make a play on a ball. He'll turn around and take it the other way. But again, once again, just everybody in this DB room, man, all these safeties are all big. They're 6'2". They're going to carry 190, 200. They're all going to hit. They're all going to come downhill. And they all have ball skills.
Yeah. We talk about where we were with some of the previous Wisconsin classes. From a physical tools standpoint, the upgrade that on the secondary has been significant. Like, all these guys have more size, more speed, and more strength. The question is are they going to be better football players? And we'll see where that ends up going. But it absolutely looks like they're going to be really good guys by the time they get their legs under them at the college level. Well,
let's wrap it up here. We talked about plan A when we were doing the offensive side. This is a plan A guy. Scott's a plan A guy.
Yep, he was very early.
Posa is a plan A guy. Like, Clayton, plan A guy. Like, Jaylen Williams is a plan A guy. It just took a little longer to get there.
Yeah.
There's so many plan A hits in this class on defense. Like, if you trust the staff to identify, and I know some people are a little weary with that, but I think it's too early to say they can't. The young players haven't had a chance to develop yet.
When you start seeing some of the freshmen bleed into the 2 deep, like, that tells you all you need to know. Like, that you don't make it into the 2 deep. I don't care if your team is not a great team or not. Freshmen don't typically make it into the 2 deep unless they're supremely gifted.
I agree.
It may not be great year one, but getting into the 2 deep is something in its own.
He is Justin. I'm Ryan. National Signing Day. Thank you for joining. Thank you for tuning in. Justin, we'll definitely talk later.
Later. Merry